Well, hello. Can everybody hear me back in here? I can be loud. Thanks y'all for coming today, and we're going to take a little stroll through the American Revolution as it presented itself in Pensacola. The lead up to it, the period of time, 18 years, the British occupied Pensacola, and then at the conclusion, which was, of course, the Battle of Pensacola. Now, if I were to say to you, Yorktown, you would immediately know what I was talking about. You would immediately recognize that this was a major battle of the American Revolution. However, to many people, if I said the Battle of Pensacola, they would look at you like a deer in the headlights and think, what on earth are you talking about? Because this is not something that has come to the forefront in terms of how we talk about the formation of our country. But we did, along with our long Spanish heritage, which of course began in the 1500s, early 1500s. What we've really got is a long Spanish period with a break with the British period, the Spanish come back, and then after them the Americans. So we have throughout the entire really history and heritage of our area had a very interesting multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic blend of people that moved in and out of the Pensacola area. And what was happening during the British period in Pensacola was no less interesting and filled with information and activities and people and events that actually affected what was going on the world stage. So we have always, from the beginning of exploration by the Spanish, been an important part of what was going on with our country, primarily because of our location. Initially, right there on the Gulf Coast, it was a great spot for ships that were trying to move from New Spain, Mexico, across the Gulf and across the Atlantic. And it also, from the very beginning, was talked about as having the best harbor on the Gulf Coast, the best bay. We were the best bay. And so it's always been a desirable spot with maybe not the most desirable atmosphere going on around it, and but it was always a prize. Pensacola was always a prize. And so we're going to talk about how it became a British prize a little bit today. And we're going to start by looking at this image here, and this is just a wonderful image. It was done by photographer George Gall, and it was done in 1765. It was done as a pen and ink, and the original's in the Library of Congress, but the Institute had it colorized so that you would be more able to kind of visualize what the town looked like. And this was done by David Edwards, consulting a lot of different resources that we have to know how to apply the coloring, as well as British naval historians, so that we would get the flags right in colorizing what flags they were flying. And so what this shows you is what the view of was from the water of Pensacola in 1765. And this was done as a commemorative piece for an Indian Congress that was held here in 1765. The Library of Congress dates it a couple of years later, but we don't think that that's correct. We think it is 1765 because it commemorates that particular event that took place then. So what you're seeing here are the ships in the harbor, and these, of course, are, we've got the large commanding officer of the fleet here. We also have coastal cruisers, and these ships were going up and down. I want you to remember what they look like, because we're going to talk about what they were doing. We have the town. If we want to start down here and move across, think about where the Barclay House is. Let's come along the bayfront. So the little section along here at the time was known as Indian Town. And so we did see we had a lot of Indians moving in and out of Pensacola. Then we're also looking, you see where the ships are positioned? This is not by accident, because right behind this ship is Seville Square, as we know it today, and over here is Ferdinand Plaza. And so the ships are kind of covering up the military parade grounds. And then in between, we've got the fort of Pensacola, and we have what was the big house that's surviving here was the Spanish governor's house. And initially it was the British governor's house, but not for long. and it became a storage house, munitions area. And then you have the different structures that are within, and then you move outside the house and you have these houses that are some existing and some that are newly built that are housing primarily along the water the British elite that are in town. So this is a wonderful visual, and if you really blow it up, we have it in whatever the million jillion pixel is to be able to really blow it up. You can see children playing on the beach. You can see African women with bundles on their heads that are walking over here at Indiantown, and you have a little boy with a dog running along the beach. So you're able to have really beautiful detail that pops out in this particular picture. But we like to use it because it tells us a lot. The town grows behind it, because when the British came, they didn't have anything good to say about Pensacola at all. It was, and it was not necessarily the Spaniards' fault. They'd only been on the mainland for a couple of years, and they just had a big storm. And so it was in pretty pitiful shape, but the British set about fixing that immediately. So how did the British even get here? The British were involved in the lead up to coming to Pensacola. We had going on in North America, we had the French and Indian War, and we had in Europe the 7 Years. And these coincided, and you saw the British military engaged in various conflicts both in Europe and in North America and in the Caribbean basin. So it was a whole really wonderful Atlantic world of conflict and of the meshing of the people that were involved. So you had up here, you've got coming out of England, you have got battles going on in Canada coming in through the St. Lawrence Seaway. You've got Charleston down here. You've got the colonies, the British colonies along the coast, Charleston, a major trading center. You've got the ships that are coming that are stopping along the African coast. Many of these are picking up enslaved people. You also have the Caribbean basin down here, and so you've got both the French and the British and the Spanish all jumbled around in this area, and then you have Pensacola right over here. Now these stars represent the travel of the ship Tartar during the period of time that we see the conflict going on, in particular across the Atlantic, but then also down in the Caribbean. Because what happens is that we have in 1762 an event that really culminates in the Treaty of Paris that will follow, and this takes place in Havana. And so the British received Pensacola as one of the prizes for their efforts in coming out ahead. And so when they come to Pensacola, they're coming into what is again, a not developed area, not like this is not like what was happening on the Atlantic seaboard, because we were Spanish for one thing, and what was here was a teeny tiny fort. They added this bastion here, but it was just a little fort, and you had little houses that were outside the fort, and that was pretty much it. That was the settlement. When the British came in, they immediately started improving things, and one of the first things they did was lay out a town plan. And so when they laid out the plan, what they did was lay out house lots, and they also positioned streets, and they named all the streets after prominent British royalty and prominent people. So, for instance, Palafox Street over here was George Street, King George. Alcany Street, as we know it today over here, was Charlotte Street, Queen Charlotte. You also had other dignitaries that were named in here, had streets named after them, and you saw the beginnings of the formation of a town. The British were giving away lots. I mean, you had to apply for one, and the people that got the first choice were the people that were coming in leadership positions and the more affluent people that were coming here. Now, you did not have the first son come to Pensacola. You had the second, third, or fourth. So you had a drop down in who was coming. These were people coming to make their way. They were coming to make their way in life. And from the very onset, the view of Pensacola was one that was mercantilistic. These people were here to make money. They wanted to figure out how they were going to be able to harvest the resources, which would be the timber industry, which by the time they had spent 18 years here, they were making good progress with that. And also trade. They were doing tremendous trade with the Indians that were moving in and out of the area. And so to begin with, they set up both trading networks, which is why they were having the Indian Congresses. They were making deals within groups that were able to supply. They were bringing deer skins in, and then they were trading them for items that the British had that they desired. So it was a good trade network. And so the people that came in here, a lot of them were military to begin with. And then you also had families that came in and they applied for lots. Now, the area that you see right down here, this is really a high status area along in here. This is where you had government officials, the military hierarchy. You also had down here people that were associated with the high status individuals. You have an expansion of the fort that begins. You see all these little roads and paths leading out, going around. And to give you a little perspective on this, you see this little stream that's running right here? This is a stream system that surrounded the colonial community. And it formed a natural boundary. And this is, if you were to go up Alkanee Street, let me get us up Alkanee Street over here. If you would go up Alkanee Street, you would have crossed the Charlotte Street Bridge. This was a thriving stream. You would have crossed over this, there was a bridge over it, and that's right in front of IHMC. So, and right before you would enter into St. Michael's Cemetery. And so this town is being put together and in a way that's going to help people thrive in the world of business and make their way. Again, if you remember that picture, we did not look one bit like Williamsburg. We did not look like what was happening on the Atlantic seaboard. We looked like what was happening in Jamaica. We had our houses here were made to take the most advantage of a hot, hot season. And so you did not have big brick houses here. What you had were more like they would have in Kingston, Port Royal, areas where you wanted to take advantage of the best you could of the temperature. One of the main activities that the British wanted to accomplish here was to map the coastal area. And the man that was doing this was George Galt. And he was here for the whole 18 years of the British occupation, and he mapped the whole coastal area. He was a very, like many of the people here, a very intellectual person. I want to tell you, we're going to talk about these people because this was the age of enlightenment. You had people here that were interested in botany. They were interested in science. They were all reading. They were into literature. So it was a very intellectual, surprisingly so, you might think, community at the onset that we have here in British settlement. But this is one of the George Galt's images, and this also gives you a little bit of a hint about how important the people were that were here. Number one, if you look at, you see this little point of land right here? This is over at the Navy base. Now here we have up here the fort, and you can see again we've got that little rivulet surrounding the town. But down here you've got Tartar Point. Now this is out on the Navy base. This is that point out at the Navy base where the Coast Guard ships are typically docked. And this was named after the ship Tartar and the ship's captain, who was Sir John Lindsay. And Lindsay came to Pensacola on a real high. Not only was he part of the aristocracy in England, but he had also just successfully completed the last trial run of Harrison's longitude test. So when he came to Pensacola, he was coming off of having actually helped establish what we have today as the calculations for figuring longitude. And this was actually a huge scientific development. So they named a point after him, and they also, after one of the officers on his ship, they named a navigational point, which was Reed's Tree. And this is, if you came in the bay, you wanted to spot that tree. It was the tallest tree over on the Navy base today, in the back. But that would have been your navigational point for coming into, as you came in, was to go up here and spot Reed's Tree and make your turn. So mapping was a huge part of what the British mission was here. Now here is Sir John Lindsay as a young naval officer. And he lived right there on that west side of town, down by the sewage treatment plant that we used to have in Pensacola. But he was a young naval officer, and so he acquired a lot. He acquired a lot 6 in the Navy ground. They had a little piece of land set aside for a small Navy yard down at the west end of town, and his lot was there. But also living in his neighborhood and for a brief time in his house was a man named Manuel Josephson. Now, Josephson was a merchant out of Philadelphia. He was considered to be one of the leading Jewish intellectuals of the day on the American end of things. And he was here overseeing his company's business and the merchandise that came into Pensacola. And so he was, when I said this was a group of intellectuals, I'm just not joking here. These people were well read, they were well educated, they were all testing out different theories of how you went about mapping, how you identified things. They were identifying plants. It was a wonderfully stimulating period of time at the beginning of the British occupation. It was full of hope. And so you also had living here, aside from these men, you also had people that you don't hear as much about, but who also were very instrumental in many of the activities that took place here. You had Martha Ford. She too lived down just a few doors down from Sir John Lindsay, and she was the mistress of George Johnstone. So she was here with him and had several children with him, one who was named after John Lindsay, because they were kinsmen, they were Scottish kinsmen, and you saw a very close relationship between people here. This would be where Sir John Lindsay's lot was. Now, this is an old picture, but where this is right down on the corner of Main and Roost, and his lot was right here. It's right in here. And you may notice on here, first of all, Main Street down here, that's the shoreline. That was the colonial era shoreline. And he was instrumental in laying out the town and naming the streets. So, Pop, Lindsay Street runs right along here. And Mansfield Street, which we know today as Zaragoza, is right up here. And so he named the street that he lived on after himself, and also after his uncle, who was very prominent in the legal field and Chief Justice of the, don't let me missay this, I'm so sorry, of the courts. I may be missaying this, but very prominent man. And he was instrumental, and this gets us on to another story, and this tells us again, it's not just something that's happening here, it's something that's happening all over the world, effects that happen in maybe little backwaters that go on to play out on a larger world stage. So what you were looking at is just right over here on the edge of town. We don't think this is Lindsay right here. This may be part of one of the speculators, Noble's homes, but that it's just off the edge of this map right over here. But Martha Ford was living right around in here, and Josephson was right around here, and he also owned property that was back behind this street, about a street back. He was also friends with Dr. Lorimer, who came in here. He was the British doctor for the fort and the military. And he too was experimenting. He was trying to figure out his own method of longitude. And he writes about collecting the largest natural magnet that he's ever seen anywhere. And this was a big chunk of ironstone that he collected from up by Otahar. I perpetually like to drive around up there off Walton Street and just see what those big old rocks look like up there, because there's a bunch of them. So you have a start of a really nice group of people. But you have not just the men, and this is where I always like to say, and I want you to know this is not a criticism at all, it's just the way it was. The history, most histories, earlier histories were written by men, and they were written from the perspective of the big man and the big event. They were not written to actually include many of the people that were just part of your everyday life, just like we are in this room. We are part of the history and heritage of Pensacola. And but you have a lot of other people that really added to what made up what is today our history and our heritage. One was Elizabeth Pilot over here, and this is a grainy image. And I don't know, Chris, have you seen this image before of Elizabeth Pilot?
That one doesn't look familiar.
And I just came upon it, and she was a young woman. She was the wife of one of the officers that came in with the 31st Regiment of Foot. She came right as they were coming into Pensacola. And so she had terrible things to say about how it looked. It was in terrible shape. But she ended up being able to live in the home of someone that had nicer facilities than she was able to have with her husband in the military. And what is fascinating about her is that she kept a journal. Now, a lot of people probably kept journals, but over time, journals often don't survive. You lose things. They get stuck in somebody's closet, and then they get pitched out. But she kept a journal, and she has a wealth of information on what was going on in Pensacola. She was here right at 4 years from the very beginning. And so she tells us a lot about, number one, what the food was. They came with a cow. The cow promptly died when it got off the ship, but they did bring a cow. They were reduced to having goat's milk because the cows just would not survive here initially. They had really poor provisions to eat. We have sandy soil, so this was not the garden spot of America here. But what did grow were watermelons and fruits that could grow in sandy soils. But she talks about that. She talks about her friendships. She talks about one of her friends going to New Orleans for Carnival. Now, we all know what Carnival is. That's Mardi Gras. And this is after Christmas at the beginning of 1766. One of her friends that was here, they went to New Orleans for what was essentially Mardi Gras, for Carnival. This is the earliest reference I've seen to someone actually going to New Orleans for Mardi Gras from here. She was invited to go, but she had lost a child and was not really feeling up to it. The child that she lost, there was no minister here at the time, no one to say, to have a funeral or to say the prayers over the dead. And her husband, who had just recovered from yellow fever, had walked the child's body, had secured a casket, because there were none. This was during the middle of the yellow fever epidemic, and you could lose 100 people a day. They lost 100 people a day. And so there was nothing to bury people in, but he secured a casket for this child, had one of the soldiers from the fort carry it, and he walked behind to the burial ground. Nobody gave it a name at that time, it's just the burial ground. And walked her to the burial ground, and he himself read the rites over her for her burial. And so Elizabeth had also many nice experiences here, along with really sad ones. Because she would talk about going, this may ring a bell with you too, anybody that's got a travel trailer or likes to camp. She got on a barge with 13 people. She went up from Pensacola up to the tip of the Escambia River, and she camped out in a tent with 13 people. They all went up there and camped out. They had their instruments, they were playing music. They were visited by the brother of the chief of one of the Creek tribes. And he enjoyed her music. He stayed longer than they meant for him to. But it was they had wonderful interactions, and so she talks about the provisions they took with them and what they did there in exploring around the Escambia River and visiting the Indian towns that were up the Escambia. So her reminiscence gives us real insight into what it would have been like to live here and how you might have entertained yourself. When she left Pensacola, they were to be here 5 years, but for her last year they were sent over to St. Augustine, which was not as great as Pensacola, so she really was missing Pensacola. She then went back to England, and her husband stayed in the military. He was a very respected man. But you also had people here like Maria Bell. Now, we normally do not really know much about people of color, either free or enslaved, during the colonial era, but we do know a lot about this woman because she ended up being the mistress of Sir John Lindsay, Captain Lindsay. And when she had a child by him, and she also went with him back to England, and he deeded her his lot in Lot 6 in the Navy ground. He gave her her freedom, and then he gave her the lot here. We're not sure if she came back. He notices in the deed that she was from Pensacola, and whether that means she was from Pensacola either during the Spanish period or she was from Pensacola when she came back here with him is up for grabs. But it kind of leans more on the side that she did come back because just 4 months after she was given the lot in Pensacola, we have a Maria Bell paying a manumission fee to one of the merchants here that was an enslaver. And so we feel like that this may have been the same Maria Bell who was securing her freedom doubly, that she was making sure, and he was too, that she was free when she came back. But Maria Bell, the lot that she was living on, we've done archaeological excavations. Lot 6 in the Navy ground, that piece of dirt that was there at the end of the road. And so people leave things behind. One thing that Maria Bell left behind was a daughter, and that would be Dido Elizabeth Bell Lindsay. And she grew up in the home of Lord and Lady Mansfield with her cousin, Elizabeth Murray. And so she too, everyone knew about this liaison, and everyone knew who Dido Elizabeth Bell Lindsay was because they write about them. They would go to dinner and meet her in the home. It's unlikely that she was ever in Pensacola. She was born in 1760, and so she was more than likely taken back. The references say that the mother was pregnant when they went back to England and she delivered. So Lindsay was back and forth again. This was like, you did not do anything over land to speak of. Everything was by water during that time. And so it was just a wonderful navigational road that wove through the waters of the Atlantic. But this is a really wonderful portrait, and that has survived with another link to Pensacola. And I should have pointed out, I don't know if you noticed it, but if you look at this portrait, the portrait of John Lindsay as a young man, she's got her dad's chin for sure. And so and her mother must have been a beauty, most definitely. Now, we do have what is left behind physically, and that is from research done on Lot 6 in the Navy ground. Because over the years we did a good bit of work down there, and one of the areas that we excavated revealed a well, a water well. And this is the bottom of a barrel-lined water well. It would have gone all the way up to the surface. We're looking here at, I think we got down probably right here, maybe 9 feet below surface. We'd lowered the water table with the dewatering system. So this barrel survived because it was underwater and in an airtight environment. But this was the bottom part of a well. This was the bottom part of a storage pit over here that was next to it. And this was lying at the bottom of it, the Spanish olive jar. And this is indicative of the fact that we knew that people were trading. They were trading all over this area, whether they were supposed to be or not. They were trading. So this is a Spanish olive jar that was at the bottom of a British well. And at first we thought it was the bucket, but then we thought, how awkward is this? We don't know that it's the bucket. Cordage did survive around its neck. You see this little notch here. And so we actually think this could have been the counterweight for the bucket, that as we've relooked at it. So what you've got here is the reuse of material, just as this is recycled here. You did not throw that barrel away if it could still be used as a shipping container, because these were the shipping containers of the time. Now, from that well, we were able to reconstruct what people were using in terms of the materials that came in. And again, this would have been something that Josephson would have imported into Pensacola for sale to British citizens. And these are very typical British wares that we're seeing here, along with Chinese porcelains. And even though we rarely ever recover anything that is intact, and this is a reproduction from Colonial Williamsburg, this little rim piece right here came from right here. So we are able to reconstruct what the vessel was, even based on very small pieces. We also recovered from that well and the storage pit, and these were filled in. We think that the lot was cleaned and material was dumped in there when they were cleaning the lot up. So we have the material that was recovered from this well all dates solidly to the middle of the British period. So we're very confident about that. But we found this piece right here, which corresponds beautifully to the Madeira, and also this very fragile little piece here that would have been this section of this glass right here. And so this was a very affluent area, which you would expect for John Lindsay. If Manuel Josephson was there for a while, also an affluent household. And for Maria Bell, she was living with people that were very well-to-do. And so it's a nice look at that. And this would have been, pretty much what the table would have looked like, based on, here we've got the little mug. You see the little pieces coming off here. So this would have been what the British table would have looked like if you could set your table really nicely, very clean and white. We look at what people are eating. We look what they're eating off of. We do a lot of work with foodways. We've done some excavations in the Governor's Garden, which is right back where the kitchen is in the village. And so people tried as best they could to have gardens, because you wanted fresh food. What they were eating would be wild game. They were really fortunate if they could get venison. They ate some fish, but you had no refrigeration, so anything you got, you ate immediately. There was no way to preserve it unless you pickled it, and think how tasty this would be. You salted it, you pickled it, you dried it. You would not be really wanting to eat what meats were available to eat if you did not have livestock. Chickens. People had chickens here and tried to keep them alive as best they could. And so you see a series of gardens. There are gardens up along what we know today as Garden Street. People that got a house lot got a garden lot. Everybody that could have a garden got a garden. And this garden right here, which was inside the compound where the Spanish governor lived, this is very similar layout that we see in English gardens. And if you look, if you've been to Mount Vernon and been to the gardens at Mount Vernon, this is the exact same plan for their garden. One of the gardens at this right in here, you see this circle right in here. This is probably a cistern or a water well to help keep things watered. You see the peach pits that we see over here. We find peach pits on almost every colonial site we work on in Pensacola. Peaches grew in profusion, as did oranges. And so we find those all over the place. And here we have peach pits that were covered from Lot 6 in the Navy ground, and these are watermelon seeds. They survived because they were in an airtight environment, capped off underground. General Haldeman that was here, sent these seeds back to friends in England saying they were the best watermelons he had ever eaten. And so we're able to then, recreate how people are sharing. We know that the customs collector, James Bruce, he was ordering in grapevine cuttings to be able to try and grow grapes in Pensacola. The people were also trying to do other things. Back with Elizabeth Pilot, I should have mentioned that where she was camping was out at Campbelltown, which was the small French settlement that is out as you're going out Scenic Highway, and you get to Noriega Drive. It's out somewhere in that area, vaguely. And so that's where they were going camping. But out there, they were encouraging the French to actually raise, be able to raise grapes and you know, make a profit out of silkworms, go figure, mulberry. And so they were doing everything they could. And by the time they got into about 1776, 1778, people are now realizing the tide has turned, and we're seeing what's going on. The Americans are going on the Atlantic seaboard, are looking for independence. Now, I want you to know that there was not one Minuteman in Pensacola throughout the entire British period. So do not think that we were patriots. We were not. We were loyalists here, because then we had a good thing going here. And we were not being oppressed like many and taxed like you were seeing on the Atlantic seaboard so much. People just wanted to live their lives, make their money, and be left alone. So you had a merchant over to the west of us that was stirring some problems up, but you did not see the general population really raising much of a hue and cry over independence. But they were preparing for what was going to come. So you start to see a preparation in the renewing of the fortifications at the fort, and people are preparing for what is going to come. And of course it did come. It came in the form of Bernardo de Galvez. And when the Spanish decided to take a more prominent role in what was happening with between the Americans and the English, what you see is, we all know the French come in, the French come in early, but the Spanish work behind the scenes, and they also then work very much at the forefront of things. And so when they decided to join the effort on the side of the Americans, they had a wonderful leader in Bernardo de Galvez, and he had a vast army that followed him, again, very multicultural group of people that were with him. And he also had a good vision. Spain wanted Florida back. Let's face it, they did want Florida back, and they also wanted Cuba back. And so so they were very intent on this. This battle, the battle itself, when it commenced in full form, did not take overly long, but this was like a months-long battle scene here, because you had them coming and going in the bay and out. You had storms that kept them offshore. But when they were finally able to come through, break through, what they were facing were being able to get close enough in to get up what we know today as Val Chico, because that's what they were going to go up and attack the fort from the north. You had the citizens of Pensacola in the fort, the people that were here that stayed put in Pensacola. They were all huddled up inside the fort where they were going to be safe, because arrangements had been made so that you did not have the town affected by any of the fighting. And so you had all of these people rammer-jammered in the fort. You had the military. You had the Spanish approaching. And once the battle really got underway with trenching that was coming across from Bayou Chico, inching its way up to what we know as North Hill, by the time that you had what could only be called a lucky shot that landed on the munitions, in the munitions storage area of the redoubt up there, then you were seeing really an end to what was going to happen. The British immediately surrendered and turned Pensacola and Florida back over to the Spanish through negotiations. But here we are up here at the surrender. And so then what happens is that you see, this is a Dean Quigley painting that was done to give another illustration of what it might have been like. But you can see again what the little town would have looked like, this rendition going down here, and with all the ships out in the harbor. So with the turnover from British back to Spanish, then what you had was a return. But many of the British did not leave. They did not leave. Just as when in 1763-64, when you had the Spanish leaving as the British came in, not all of them left. We know that a couple of them stayed. One was an interpreter. He remained an interpreter. He was here during the Spanish period predating British. He stayed on as an interpreter for the British. And then he was also here during the second Spanish period. And his name was Antonio Garzon. And that may ring a bell with you as well, Garzon Point. And so he was married to a woman who was a member of the Indian Nation. And so we can place him and his wife here for a long period of time. He would have been a really wonderful observer of what was going on here. So by the time you get to the end in 1778 and then 1871, the fort, you can see how much improved the fort is. You still see the town plan, but you can see that, you've had some of the lots that are empty. Not lot 6, it's still going along right down here. But the fort has really improved. And the question that we always ask is, where are these people? Where are these people that died in the Battle of Pensacola, both English and Spanish? Where are the British who died here by the just bucket loads? Because this was a perilous place to be. So where were they buried? Now, there have been different discussions over the years. A lot of the discussion comes from accounts in the late 1800s, and they talk about the burial ground being on the west side of town. And some early drawings show it being right on the waterfront. But I'm not a real proponent of that theory, because that is where Sir John Lindsay lived, and his house would have been sitting right on top of the Spanish burial ground, which is not a particularly viable thought for him. So you could have seen something over here, but you have to wonder, because this creek, all in here, was being used as the watering. This is where the British Navy watered, was what creek was coming out down here. So certainly we know there were burials over there, because during the water treatment plant work, they dug into some burials that were over there, and they were in caskets. But we have no information about what date or year they would have been. So we have people buried in odd places all around town. We come across odd burials everywhere in Pensacola. So it's hard to say where it was, but we can say in 1778, they marked it. And they marked it just with the letter E, and you can see that this is, kind of a broad-based area going up here. But to give you some context, here again, we're going to go up Alkanese Street. We're going to cross the Charlotte Street Bridge, and we're going to go into this area around here, which should be right about modern-day St. Michael's Cemetery over in here. And we know that they were here. There, for 18 years, the British controlled East and West Florida. There is not one tombstone that has ever been identified associated with the British death in this whole area. Not one. Now, somebody had to have had one. They probably were burying their dead, maybe marking them with brick. We see references to entombments. They refer to the tomb of, but they don't say what the tomb was made out of, and that could just be generic phrase. But they were not ordering in tombstones. They were not making tombstones. So they were either making wooden crosses. We do know they had formal cemetery, because they talk about people being buried in row X next to 3 doors down from this person and then the next row. So they had a very formal cemetery. And so we first start seeing it here, but then we start to have several maps that we've been able to reconcile to the contemporary landscape. And if we do that, what we're seeing up here is, this is contemporary St. Michael's Cemetery, right in here. Let's see, where's that letter E? Here's the letter E that you were looking at on the map. And this is from 1780 and 1781 map. And so, most definitely, the British burial ground of the late British period is up under that I-110 connector area. So that we've never seen any indication of them, never been able to identify anybody archaeologically, but in the late 1800s, they did bump into people out in the roadway. They bumped into them while they were doing utilities work, and that was up around Tarragona Street and Chase. And these were people that were described as military people. They had dirks at their side. These might have been bayonets. They also had coinage on them that was dated from, I believe, 1772 and 1774. Coinage, at the time, they were thinking they were people associated with the Anglo-Jackson's incursions into Florida, but no, more than likely these were British and Spanish. The British were paying their people with Spanish coinage, so it could go either way here. But there were burials that were uncovered that were more than likely associated with the men that were killed in the Battle of Pensacola, just because of the fact that they were apparently clothed and had their weaponry with them, which is not surprising. We see indications of that in burials at Fort Pickens that are described, and they buried people in everything that they had on, just in the ground as you are. And so that, and you have to know now, these crosses, these are just drawn on a map, so, it's, you've got a little squeeginess going on here, but you don't have squeeginess right here, because this is right in the very center of it. So this is where these people are. And of course, all of our city and county are aware of this too. So I don't think anyone needs to be disturbed of anything that's going to be happening in the area, because everyone is aware that what you've got up there is fragile. And they probably encountered it when they were putting in this I-10 connector here. It's hard to think that they did not impact that cemetery in some way, shape, or form, but it was at a time when people just didn't say anything and kept going. Today, we celebrate the people that were here and the people that were associated with being here. And this is what the 1776 project aims to do. And that is to identify a sample of people that were here in 1776, along with the people that came earlier, the whole 18-year span. Now, when we celebrated Florida coming under the American flag back in 2021, did anybody here participate in the 1821 Sampler Project, whereby you sent your picture in? Raise your hand up high. You sent your picture in and you got to honor and represent someone that was here. Well, we're doing it again for the American Revolution. And so what we're going to be doing is called the 1776 Sampler, and you're going to be able to sign up again to represent someone that was here. The same researchers are working on it. Aaron Renfro is the researcher working on identifying 1,776 people that give us the range of people that were here. And Joe Vinson is designing the website, the platform that it will sit on. One of the people that we're looking at, now Dorothy Walton wasn't here during the American Revolution, but she of course was the wife of the signer, George Walton. And she came here with her son, and she's buried in historic St. Michael's Cemetery. Jennifer Melcher, one of our senior students, is working on a storyboard walking tour of St. Michael's that will also look at the people in St. Michael's that have links to those that were here or that served in the Continental Army. And we have quite a few of them in St. Michael's Cemetery. But one is Dorothy Walton, and so this is one of the events that we have going on in order to honor the people that were here. The individuals that, this is just a few of them. Antonio Garzon, who was the translator for the British, and his wife. You had the bricklayers, you had the Bruces, and you had the George Gall, John Lorimer. They were friends. They were both members of the American Philosophical Society. And so these were serious people. You had a Mrs. Bell widow. Whether or not this was Maria Bell or not, we do not know. It could have been another Mrs. Bell. But you had a number of named and unnamed enslaved people. Elizabeth Pilot, she owned a slave named Emma. And then you also have a schoolmaker that was here at the end. And the list just goes on. And this list is drawn from the people, approximately 104 of them, that were here and counted as heads of households when the Spanish came into Pensacola. And so some of them were here for the duration, some of them were here just at the end. But we have, again, a really wide variety of people that were in Pensacola. And while the big man, Galvez, and the big event, the Battle of Pensacola, was big, the actual story is the people of Pensacola that made us who we are today and give us the background that we have today, along with our other Spanish heritage line. So, I've got two things for you. I'll take a question or two. And but first of all, I want to tell you, I told you how bad the food was. It was terrible. And if you were having to eat dried up pickled beef, you wanted something to make it taste better. And so I'm giving you a recipe for grape ketchup, and this is one of Kathy Parker's recipes. So take one if you wish. Is our food expert out at the university. And so you would make this up, and you would serve it with that maybe not so tasty pickled dried beef, and it would taste better. So if you'd like to have a ketchup recipe to go home and try, I'm sure it would be excellent with a nice pot roast. And then also, if you want to read, I highly suggest these two books. One is Independence Lost. This is by Kathleen Duvall. She came here to talk. She's on the Ken Burns special on the American Revolution, and this is a really nice look at the Gulf Coast and what was going on here. And y'all can pass that around if you want to jot it down. And the other one is the Journal of Don Francisco Saavedra. He came with Galvez. He was appointed by the king to come and document everything that was happening. So he accompanied Galvez. He was a friend of Galvez, and he recorded everything. He did not just record the battle. He was sent to observe and record what he saw. So he gives a wonderful review of what Pensacola was like in 1781, when you had shops that were filled with every kind of merchandise from all over the world. You had an orderly town. You had nice roads. You had lovely cottages and houses that were built. And so his description of Pensacola is really a delightful one to read for what the town would look like in 1781. So this too, this is like Elizabeth Pilot's journal. These are both written by people that were actually here and were recording with us all. So do y'all have any questions? And I can answer, and I'm always happy to be corrected, so if I have misspoken about anything, you just raise your hand. Yes, Lou?
Margo, are you aware of any evidence that Galvez's success here actually extended the Revolutionary War, because the British soldiers who survived, I understand, were paroled by Galvez and sent up to New York, which operated to reinforce?
Yeah. I don't know if it did or not, Lou. I don't know if that was a factor, but Galvez himself, he too was a man of the Enlightenment. So he was a military man, but he was also a man of feeling. And I think that probably the British military that was paroled or pardoned and sent back, I feel quite certain they were put back to work, more than likely. But it's hard to say. What Galvez did, and this is my personal take on this. When you had the British coming into the St. Lawrence Seaway, they were coming in to come over the backside of the American colonies from the north. Well, from the west, what you had was the Mississippi River that would take you up and into the Ohio Valley area. So what Galvez did, when he was able to take Natchez, when he was able to take Mobile, Pensacola, what he did was cut off access up the Mississippi River. So the British could not use that route to get themselves up and come into the backside and approach from the Ohio Valley area. So I think he closed the back door on the British, and that just cut off their supply lines, and that really did damage to them. So how much longer it would have gone on is hard to say, but this was actually, I consider to be one of the major battles of the American Revolution, because it was pivotal in what was going to be able to happen as a outcome. And I'm hoping moving forward we hear more about it, that more people start to actually envision it. I had hoped, did all of y'all see the Ken Burns special?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Chris and I, we had a reach out. We had a reach out from one of the producers on the Ken Burns project, and they were looking for imagery to use, and also for anything that we might have that would be helpful to tell the story. So we pooled all of our resources and put it together in a bundle. And we don't think they used anything we sent them unless it was just some vague scene, something from the edge. But what we got was a small sliver, but the fact that they reached out was a big deal, because she said, we really fought to have Pensacola actually mentioned here, because we did feel like it was important to be in the story. So this may be the start of more realization of what actually did happen, and maybe a more broad-reaching kind of assessment of the role of Florida and Pensacola. St. Augustine, they were active. They were over there on the East Coast, and they definitely were very aligned with what was going on more with the colonies over in that part of the state, but not much to it. They had a couple of little skirmishes on bridges and on the edge of things, but nothing like what was going on over here. And so it's it's a nice question to ask. Who can know? Some historian will figure that out one day, of what they think about whether or not it really prolonged it or it ended it. So who knows? Yeah, and did you have a question?
Well, so many. First of all, your presentation is outstanding. Just, honestly. It kind of blows my mind that the maps were so accurate. The hot air balloon hadn't even been invented until 1770. So, they must have had other ways to do it. But anyway, it's amazing that we can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's there and that's there, and these points that we know today. And it looked like the 1765 painting,
Yes.
looked like the fort wall was less than a story tall. And there were not very many houses in it, as you said, until the expansion. But were there not threats to the people living outside the fort walls?
The people living outside the fort walls?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, there were a lot of people outside the fort walls, and then it was, as time went on, people were settling all around there. In the fort wall itself, they took down the waterfront part of the wall. I think that was in 1769, to let the breezes come in to try and help. Nobody knew at that time what caused yellow fever. So they did not know what caused it. They thought it was bad water, which in a sense it was, because you were breeding mosquitoes. But they didn't really have a grip on what caused it, and there was nothing they could really do about it. So Dr. Lorimer was instrumental, along with General Haldeman, in looking at ways to keep people healthy, get those gardens going, get that air stirring, which indeed were both common sense ways to approach that disease. And when they took down the front of the fort walls, and they didn't need much from the water because they could see what was coming. They were not expecting attack so much from the water as they would have been from inland. And everybody was real careful to keep their backside covered up. Yes?
To Lou's point about the revolution and shortening the time frame, that, if I'm not mistaken, was mentioned when Galvez was made the 8th honorary citizen of the United States. So that was pretty
That was
significant.
one, and I should have said that. He was first recognized as a great Floridian And that was a big thing when he was recognized as a great Floridian. And then he was recognized as an honorary U.S. citizen, which again was as it should be. If it had not been for him, and if it had not been for the money that the Spanish provided, the Americans, I mean, they would have had a hard time on it. Because the money that flowed helped to pay the troops, to pay for the munitions. You had to have the funds to be able to support your military.
Well, I loved your presentation too, but in light of what's going on in today's world and the allies that our country has depended on throughout our history, I would hope that something would be made in our celebration that we weren't just patriots that were defying the British King of England if we had not had allies such as the French and the Spanish to help us, that we might not have won that American Revolution.
That's true. I think the mindset of the day too, again, we were living in what they did call the Age of Enlightenment. And people were looking at personal freedoms, they were looking at freedom, they were looking at intellectual freedom, personal freedom. And this was across the board. This was, the Spanish, the French, all of the thinkers of the period were looking at things in different ways. And I even think Elizabeth Pilot, I want to say, she saw things in different ways too. She herself was keeping little notes. One of her notes said, today it was 99 3/4 degrees hot. Now you tell me how that, this is a specific heat levels here. So she is keeping, so people are looking at who they can align themselves with. Certainly, Elizabeth Pilot was grateful to have one of the French women that had come to Campbelltown to come and help her. She stayed with her for 2 years and helped her because there was nothing in Campbelltown. It just fell right apart. But I do think that, there's a big dynamic that goes on, and I think the surface has really just been scratched. Because again, what you had, people can recount everything that happened at Battle of Pensacola. Every cannonball that was shot, they counted them up, you knew. The Spanish were worried. They went out and collected their cannonballs and brought them back because they were so worried they were going to run out. And so there's a lot to be looked at that broadens the picture significantly.
And you mentioned, I'm interested in the Indian town that you
Yeah.
mentioned, and I don't know anything at all about it really.
Well,
But
that was
we had native indigenous people that were back and forth on both sides, it seems like. Did we have a significant help in any way in this area?
Oh, we did. Now, you did not have people just living here permanently. Indian Town got its name because people were camped out over in that area. And the houses over there, we also think that could have been, you might have even applied Africa Town to that too, because the buildings over there are significantly different. The doors are different shapes. They have a very African door shape too than an Indian door shape. But the people, they moved in and out. They didn't just live right here in town. They came in to trade and they lived out. And they were aligned on both sides. But primarily, they really did favor the British in the sense that the British had better things to trade than the Spanish did. So a lot of it had to do with who had the better stuff. Oh, yes?
Yeah, Jim Myers. I might be getting off the subject a little bit, but back to your burial grounds, which is over there near the Civic Center. Let's go back 300 years to the Luna. Is there any body that's speculating or trying to find where those burial grounds are?
They would have had a cemetery over there. Dr. John Worth works with his team over there. And they are slowly but surely figuring out how the community was organized, how the structures were situated, because the Spanish were very particular about how they laid their towns out.
Well, the Spanish were pretty good about documenting everything. So
They did.
is there any kind of archives over in Spain
particular chapel. And so they would have been either underneath the floor there or very close around that structure. And that's why, if you can identify the outline, if you can start reconstructing the neighborhood, you can project where the chapel would be based on how they
So
designed it.
geographically, we really don't know where they are.
No, there's been no evidence whatsoever of the cemetery over there today. And there may never, that may never turn up. But it's a wonderful view of what was going on with the first settlers. And it's been wonderful working with the neighbors over there. I think everybody's proud. If you live in the Lennon neighborhood, you should be proud. You're sitting there in America's first neighborhood.
Sorry to get off subject.
That's okay.
Okay, you said Galvez, a lot of the British wanted to stay, but did they have to become American citizens? I know.
Oh, the British, they left.
You said some of them stayed.
Some of them stayed, but most of them left. So for instance, because they did not necessarily want to stay here at that point. Where they went, a lot of them went to Canada. You had people that went to Canada. You had people that went to New York. A lot of them went up the East Coast. John Lorimer, who was the doctor, he went first to New York, and then he went to Middle Turks and Caicos, and the remnants of his plantation house still survive in Middle Turks and Caicos down there, the foundation remains. So he went there with the woman that he left all of his estate to, who was, of course, a free woman of color. And because many of the men that were here were single, but they were not alone. And so it was a really dynamic mix of people. But you had a lot of people in the Caribbean basin. They just went to Jamaica. They went down in that area. Some went back to England. George Galt went back to England. So you saw people move around. Who stayed here? The Cummings, and this is who, and their family is buried in St. Michael's, and this is who Maria Bell paid her manumission fee to. They stayed put in Pensacola during the Second Spanish period. And so some people left, some people stayed. And so it just depended on your personal circumstance. Okay, well, thank you so much.